Good evening and welcome to week 5. Before I get into our discussion this week, I just want to wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving and hope you have an enjoyable 4-day break here. This week, we're looking at interventions and how interventions enhance student learning. So, in this discussion for this week, we're going to be using a situation and I'm going to be responding to this situation. Um, So I'm going to assume that I'm a principal at an elementary school, and there's a 10-year-old student. I'm going to assume that this kid is in fourth grade who is struggling. And the teacher of the student has contacted the parent by phone to discuss putting some extra support in place for him. The parent, who is concerned about her son struggling, is concerned about her son struggling in school academically, but she does not want her child singled out or made to feel different. She is worried about what intervention might look like for him. She has requested a meeting with me to discuss the situation. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume that this child has a reading, is struggling with reading, and the teacher identified um, some particulars related to reading, and that's where the concern stems from. So I'm going to be responding to this parent through a video, and let's begin. First off, I want to thank you for reaching out to me. I always appreciate when parents reach out and have concerns and questions about our school. And I haven't had the opportunity to meet with you before. So um, before we dive into the situation pertaining to your child, I just want to share a little bit about our school and what we value here. Um, there's 5 main things that we really focus on and value here in our school, and that is focusing on student learning and not just teaching. Um, so what I mean by that is we look at each student, we want them to master the learning goals instead of just covering curriculum or content. And looking back on our own education, we can probably think of times when we maybe were in learning situations where um, perhaps we didn't pick up on things like we should, and the teacher just kept moving along with the material. And perhaps you fell behind, or I fell behind. I know I did. And what we really want to get away from is just teaching, moving forward, and not stopping for those struggling learners. So our school, we really try to shift the focus on student learning. Um, and we really promote individualism. We really respect each student as themselves. And we want to make sure that every student has the same opportunity to learn. And we really value family partnerships. So again, I thank you for reaching out. Um, so in coming up with those values, our school kind of uses these 4 questions, which is very important to student learning. Uh, and it helps us keep our focus on uh, the student. And these 4 questions are: what specifically do we expect all students to learn? How will we know when a student has learned what we expect? And how will we respond when students are having difficulty? And how will we respond when students demonstrate that they have learned? So these are really the 4 guiding questions that creates our culture around student learning. And I circle questions 3 and 4. And these 3 questions specifically um, is what we're going to talk about today because your child, there's been some concerns brought up with your child by his teacher. And just to touch on that a little bit, I want to just stress that your child is a wonderful student. He's progressing and doing very well in school. He tries really hard, is very engaged in his learning, gets along well with his peers. Is really just, the teacher really enjoys having him in class. Um, and in talking with the teacher, the concerns that she has I don't know how much she talked to you in specifics, but it seems to be about just some reading issues. Um, and just through different classroom assessments and whatnot, uh, your child seems to be struggling a little bit with reading comprehension. And in all other areas of reading, such as reading fluency, decoding, word recognition, pronunciation of words, all of that he's doing really well. But there's just uh, he's just showing that he's lagging a little bit behind in comprehending or the reading comprehension. And that raises a little bit of concern because it's a very important skill for students to have, especially as we move on into fifth grade, sixth grade, middle school. Uh, Reading becomes a lot more nonfiction and more intense. So we want to really try to catch this from the get go and to build on all those other strengths so that that doesn't become a larger issue down the road. Before I get into talking about our intervention program, um, I just want to use a swimming analogy here. So please bear with me. Let's imagine that we have students from a classroom here, and they're all placed in a pool. And the goal by the end of the summer, all these kiddos will be able to swim across the pool. Well, naturally, we know that every kid has different skill levels when it comes to swimming. Some might be able to jump in and swim across the pool in record time, very quickly and without any supports. And others might be frightened to just even put their toe in the water for whatever reason. So there's quite a spectrum of abilities. Um, so, like I said, there's many different levels, and some might need supports. If the ultimate goal is to get across the swimming pool, uh, students can be supported in many different ways if they're not able to do this on their own. And these supports might just be temporary to help them develop confidence. Maybe it's to help them refine a skill. But some kids might, you know, choose to use some flippers to help them propel through the water. Some might need a life vest or flotation device or little floaties around their arms. Maybe some need none other than maybe a pair of goggles or to help them see. Some might refer to a kicking board to help them or a fun noodle to help support their buoyancy in the pool. And others might need more support even than that. And that might require, the assistance of another person to help them acquire that goal of swimming across the pool. And some of these kids that are focusing on swimming might really excel. And swimming across a pool might be very routine. And these kids are excelling and they love cannonballing in, or maybe they love jumping from the high platform. Maybe their natural skill is swimming, such as Michael Phelps, or maybe they're even have supernatural powers and can run across the water. Um, so, what I'm just trying to grab a point here is that uh, individuals have all different levels. And just like in the classroom, too, learning, there's really a spectrum. And depending on the subject area, students have different skills, strengths, and weaknesses. And each student learns differently and at their own rate. So hold this analogy um, in your mind here as we talk about our school program specifically. So, obviously, our classroom's not a swimming pool, so we have other supports in place to help students learn. Um, and what we call our program to help students is called RTI, or Response to Intervention. Um, and this is a program that has been researched extensively and has proven to have really good results. And that's why we chose to use it. Um, I like to think of it, RTI. Another expression I like to use is it's um, the right to improve. Especially that's one of our focuses at our school is focusing individually on students and helping them promote learning. And every student has uh, that right to improve their own learning. And it is our job as educators to support them and to make sure that they have that right to improve. So what I'm going to do is just go through the RTI program and just talk a little bit about it, give you a background, and talk about how your child might fit within this program here. So why do we use RTI? Um, well, RTI has proven to be a very proactive program. It provides early support and it identifies needs early in the learning process so that things don't snowball and students don't fall further behind. And with the RTI, we really look at um, early interventions rather than waiting to fail. We don't want to move through the whole process or through a duration of time and then realize the student failed. What we want to do is catch those learning difficulties at the get go and try to be proactive and preventative. RTI uses research based and validated interventions in instruction, whether that's specific intervention strategies to help students or whether it's just the typical regular classroom instruction that teachers are doing. RTI really focuses on monitoring student progress and that kind of guides instruction. Decisions are made based on data, how students are performing. And this is where we utilize assessments for determining this, a variety of assessments. Um, and that really helps us pinpoint what students might need the additional supports and help. So here's a pyramid here that kind of highlights the three different tiers of RTI. We have tier one, which is considered the more core classroom instruction. And as we move up the pyramid, the supports get more intensive and also uh, the frequency of the interventions increase as well. Um, so what I'm going to do is just highlight these three tiers independently and give you some insight to what this looks like for your child or could look like. Tier one is considered group instructional interventions or interventions that occur in the classroom. Uh, and this is, I want to really emphasize here that tiers one and tier two, these things are happening in the regular classroom setting. Um, and students don't even know that these interventions are really occurring. Because what we do, we really focus on having teachers create a lot of tools. And in tier one, all students are receiving uh, interventions by the teacher. And these are also called differentiated strategies or differentiation. These are where the teacher is just noticing, you know, the individual uniqueness of each learner and they adjust according to their needs. Um, and some examples of this uh, could be, well, before I even get into that, um, the interventions, if we look back at these would be like in the swimming pool, providing some supports for students. Um, it might be giving them a kicking board to help them develop a better kick. It might be um, providing a flotation to help them uh, um, to swim or to develop a greater arm strength, whatnot. So these are all happening. Tier one and two are within the classroom. So all students are in the same classroom and they're getting these individual supports. And some examples um, that teachers do to differentiate strategies for students could be um, really identifying the learning objectives at the start of each lesson, clearly communicating to students why they're learning what they're doing, using visual aids to promote greater understanding, whether that be a graphic organizer of some sort or word mapping. Um, It might be asking a student to repeat instructions. This is just a way to uh, make sure the student is understanding, and it helps us understand if there's any clarifications needed. Another differentiated approach might be using materials that are very engaging because they have a high interest level to the student. So really try to figure out what motivates that student, and using those motivating sources to help promote learning. Those would be examples of tier one, and this is happening with all students. Um, and in the tier one level, that's where we're really working and figuring out if there's students that are struggling. Um, and if they are, they might start receiving some tier two supports. Uh, let's talk about what those might look like. Um, so, tier two are more the targeted group intervention supports, and this could be supplemental academic programs. This might be, um, you know, happening in small group settings or small group interventions 2 to 3 times weekly. Uh, usually in the classroom, it could happen in another room as well, or setting in the school. Um, and in this tier two, we really focus on um, continuous monitoring, and we have processes in place and guidelines to realize if students are making gains in the difficulties they might be having, and whether we need to change the intervention, or we need to pull back or fade back, um, or if we have to intensify them. Um, and I want to be really clear here that tier one and tier two are happening all the time in every classroom in our school. So students really don't even know the difference between tier one and tier two. So I just want you to know and feel assured that your student isn't going to be stigmatized if he's receiving some more specific interventions in his reading. Um, just so you know, we have a program each day in our school, in our classrooms, in your child's classroom, where we have a period called the power period or power up period, and that's 30 to 45 minutes each day, and that's something that every single student participates in. But what each student might be doing during that power up period each day is a little bit differently. Um, for example, your child is uh, really skilled in math, and he is, at the top of the charts compared to his peers and with his math. And for some of the power up days, he is getting enhancement and enrichment to, uh, help build and refine those skills even more. And he enjoys it too. So it's an opportunity to do something he enjoys. Um, Other times, he might be able to pick an activity that he just enjoys, such as craft or um, coloring, something like that. But 2 to 3 times weekly during that power up time, we have students also getting additional um, supports through interventions, and it might be math, it might be reading. Uh, so for your child, um, what could happen here is, or what we're suggesting and advocating for, is that your child would receive some specific instruction um, in a small group with other students who are also struggling perhaps in similar areas, and this would be like specific to like his reading comprehension, helping him develop strategies to help promote that reading comprehension. And this would be done by uh, strategies that the classroom teacher has learned about on how to promote this. It might include pulling in the reading specialist or reading teacher to help support that um, intervention. And we do have some different um, reading programs that can support this, and those would probably be come into play to help promote that comprehension. Um, so again, this would be occurring 2 to 3 times a week, and um, these would be occurring at the same time when other students are also getting individualized interventions or maybe enrichment activities. So it's built into into the classroom structure. So the important thing is your student is not going to miss out on any core instruction. Um, so this is just added support to help with that. Now, tier two interventions, we usually um, look at doing these interventions for 6 to 8 weeks, and then after that, we'll do an assessment and kind of determine whether what kind of gains have been made. Um, and if gains are not being made after a certain period of time, that's where we would get into looking at, some of the tier three supports. And this is more intensive, and a lot of times we call these as pull-out supports. And this can be either small group uh, or individualized. So the or tier three interventions are very specific to the individual needs, and it might be some very targeted strategies on reading comprehension, for example. Um, and this, I would compare this to like perhaps like in their swimming pool analogy. If there's a student who really is struggling to swim, it might be because who knows what the reason might be, but it might be taking that student out of the bigger pool and maybe going back to, a shallower pool and starting there, getting more comfortable, focusing on skills in that more shallow pool, and then try to build up to going back into that bigger pool. So the tier three is much more um, specific and individual for a student. And also keep in mind, uh, these are very fluid too. Um, if a student is in tier three and is making significant gains, they could, some of the interventions, we could fade them, pull them back a little bit, and the student could go back to tier two support. And if they're doing well in tier two, they could drop down to tier one and they could go back up again. So it's really fluid. I want you just to know that once you're locked into a tier, that's not where a student is. It's not a life sentence. Um, However, at tier three level, if gains are not being made in the tier three, that's where we would look at perhaps a referral for special education support and perhaps suggest a um, evaluation for special education related services. And in this case, with your child, right now we're looking at just the added tier two supports. We feel pretty confident that that's where we can make some big gains. Um, so that's a little bit about our RTI, or response to intervention program, that we have at our school. Um, I would invite you to follow up with me if you have any questions. Also, follow up with your teacher. And I just want to reiterate here that at school, we're really here for supporting your child, uh, trying to help them be the best learner that they can be. And so we can support them as they progress through uh, their learning career within our school district. Again, if you have any questions, you know how to reach me, and I would love to hear back from you. Again, thanks for your continued support. Um, Children do better when they have a big team around them, and that includes the school, the school teachers, support staff, family support, and the community helping. And when all those are in place, students do better. And so I just can't thank you enough for reaching out and inquiring more. Thank you.